Grown and Growing Podcast, episode number 52, Ways to Slay Student Loan Debt with Natalie Jean-Baptiste, attorney and financial wellness advocate. You're listening to Grown and Growing with Sonia Hamlin. Welcome back to the Grown and Growing podcast. If you have student loans, this episode is for you. If you know somebody with student loans, you need to go ahead and forward this episode to them. I know you haven't listened to it yet, but I have, and I know the amount of gems that are dropped in this episode. It's going to give people a lot of hope. My next guest is Natalie Jean-Baptiste. Natalie is a financial wellness advocate who works with student loan borrowers to manage and eliminate debt. She started her career in the music industry, where she handled various contracts for superstar acts like Alicia Keys and Janet Jackson. Though her personal struggle with student loan debt led her to become a bankruptcy attorney. After nearly a decade in private practice, Natalie joined the Legal Aid Society as a staff attorney, where she represents low-income New Yorkers burdened with debt. Natalie is committed to economic empowerment and advocacy for student loan borrowers. You can find Natalie's full bio in the show notes. Without further ado, I'm excited to get into this topic. Welcome, Natalie. Welcome to the Grown and Growing podcast. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk to your audience.
I'm so glad you're here. I feel like this is a very timely conversation, just given the state of where we are with student loans. But before we get into that conversation, I do have a little question related to the podcast. Obviously, the podcast is called Grown and Growing. And, what we talk about is how we are grown, right? We deal with very real, very adult situations and lifestyle, but we're also growing and evolving and changing. So I have a little question for you that kind of plays into the name. So I want to ask you, what makes you feel really grown? I feel really grown when?
I feel really grown when I'm free to make my own decisions and I don't have to check with anybody, you know what I mean? And just, the freedom to get up and go if I want to, or stay if I want to. So that's like the independence of being grown.
Now, some people would say, oh, that just started when you were 18. But at what age would you say you really felt comfortable exuding that freedom or practicing that freedom? Was it 18 or was it a little later?
Oh, it was definitely a little later. And I mean, sometimes I still don't feel like I'm fully grown. Right. But I would say the period right after law school I felt so free. I had been admitted to the bar. I was working in the music industry. And that was a time, I was feeling on top of the world and feeling grown for sure.
I'm sure you have some stories about that time. So the second half of that question is, what experiences or signs let you know that you're still growing?
Oh, wow. Every day when I'm learning new things and facing new challenges, it's like life is just always, teaching you lessons. You're learning, you're growing. I always feel like I'm growing and learning and, evolving, because there's so much to learn. Whatever field you're in, whatever you're working on, you can always evolve and improve. So,
yeah. And there's nothing like, changes and an evolution that makes you feel alive, that makes you feel like, you're on this planet and you're living and you're experiencing all that life has to offer. So,
right.
Good answers. All right. So now on to why we are here. I actually found your page because one of the things that you had done at the time was you had done a live on student loan debt. And one of the ways that you describe yourself, you're an attorney for sure, a practicing attorney. How long have you been practicing law?
It's going to be 20 years next year. So I'm 19 years in.
Okay, so you're not new to this.
No.
And so one of the things that you say on your Instagram page is that you help student loan disappear. And look, there's no time of more than right now that people want their loans to disappear. How do you help them do that? How did you get into this line of work?
Oh, wow. Okay. So my story is interesting. I went to law school because I wanted to party with rock stars, right? Like I wanted to be an entertainment lawyer and work in the music industry. And I did get my foot in the door at some of the biggest record labels in the world. And I'm, working, but I had this mountain of student loan debt that initially I was not even worried about. I said, oh, I'm going to work in the music biz. I'm going to make a ton of money. I'm going to be able to pay it off in no time. But in reality, I wasn't making that much money, not enough to put a meaningful dent in that amount of student loan debt. So it had fast forward almost a decade where I just felt trapped, right? Like this debt was just a lot, not just my student loans, but just my other consumer debt. So I made the decision to file for bankruptcy, and I started consulting with bankruptcy attorneys, right? So I was setting up these consultations, and then when they would tell me what their retainer fee was, it was blowing my mind because I'm like, I can't afford this. Like, how am I supposed to do this? So I decided I was going to teach myself bankruptcy law, right? Having no background in it at all. Never even took one bankruptcy course in law school, but I taught myself. And then I learned this exception to the rule that student loan debt is not dischargeable, right? Because from the moment you take those on, they drill into your head like, this is not dischargeable in bankruptcy.
Right.
Like you're going to have to pay it no matter what. Right. So I had already kind of made peace with that idea. But then when I was reading the law and the statute and learning, I said, there is this undue hardship exception. So I read this and I said to myself, this sounds like me. I'm gonna give it a try. Right. And, just naively decided I'm going to get rid of my student loans. Right. So I'm walking into this world of bankruptcy law that I know nothing about. And I'm just like this girl who's like, I'm going to get rid of my student loans. What? Like it's hard, like the Elle Woods of this world.
Right.
And then people are looking at me like seasoned bankruptcy attorneys are looking at me like, who does this girl think she is? Like, you can't get rid of student loans. Like, oh, sweetie, you're wasting your time. It's impossible. So long story short, I just kept at it. It took about a year and a half, but I ended up wiping out $120,000 of my own student loans, right?
Wow.
So I said, I want to help everybody, right? It's like this, why don't more people do this or know about this, right? So I started my own practice, and I started doing bankruptcy and student loans. And initially I was like, is my case a fluke? Like, can I really do this for people? And I've been doing it for almost a decade now. And, I did wind down my private practice, and I work for the Legal Aid Society now, where I only represent low-income borrowers for free. It's a nonprofit that represents low-income debtors at no cost. But I do teach and consult. So I teach other attorneys to do what I do. I teach I teach consumers how to do this themselves.
Right.
So so my superpower is discharging student loans in bankruptcy, right?
First of all, yes, that is amazing. I mean, I'm glad that's the thing about youth or not knowing and just jumping right in and not listening to critics. because you were able to do something. I mean, my sister works in financial aid, and I told her I was interviewing you, and she was like, and I told her she got, you got your loans discharged, and she was like, how? How was she able to do that? Now, were your loans private or were they federal student loans?
Federal student loan.
Wow.
Right.
That's even more remarkable.
Right. So let me just, tap into what it requires so that people know that it's not this impossible mountain to move. Right. So when you're trying to discharge student loans, you have to prove to the court that it would pose an undue hardship. And they look at three things, right? Mm-hmm. The first is, are you able to maintain what they call a minimal standard of living for yourself and repay your loans? So when they're looking at what your minimal standard of living is, you have to be able to cover your basic needs: housing, transportation, food, clothing, like the part of your normal budget, right? So if after you pay your rent, put gas in your car, put food on the table, keep your lights on, you don't have enough disposable income to cover the minimum payment, then you've satisfied the first part of the test, right? So the second one is, are there additional circumstances that indicate that this could persist for a significant period of time, right? Not that it's just, oh, I broke my leg and I have to be out of work for a few weeks, or, something that's like temporary or not a big issue. But if you have other things going on, like some type of illness, or, a sick child, a sick parent, if your degree is pretty much like the market, there's no market for your degree for you to be able to earn what you expected to earn. So whatever other circumstances that are impacting your ability to repay the loan, those are considered. And then the last one is good faith. Did you make a good faith effort to repay the loan, right? And good faith doesn't even necessarily mean you made a payment. It just means that you had the intention of paying it. You've communicated with your lender to say, I can't afford this payment. Can you please, give me some options? So any demonstration that you are trying your best to repay it, right? And, the longer your payment history is, the more communication you've had with your lender, even if you just applied for a deferment, that's a demonstration of good faith, or a forbearance, whatever it is. So there are a lot of things that indicate to the court that, look, I'm trying to pay this. I want to pay this, but I simply can't. So once you satisfy those three things, then you've satisfied the undue hardship standard and you're eligible to discharge the loan.
Wow. So many questions about that, because so is there not an income to loan debt like ratio that they look at? Is there an income threshold? Do they consider your income at all, or do they just consider those three things, right?
They really look at your budget. So it's your income, right? And of course, an income for one person is different. The standard is different from if you have, 3 kids to feed, right? So even outside of bankruptcy, if we're just talking about the income-driven repayment plans, they always consider your household size, right? So it's not just how much money you make, it's your household size as well, because they use certain guidelines depending on how many people in the household. But with respect to the bankruptcy part, they do look at your reasonable and necessary expenses, right? So you're not going to factor in certain things like vacations or spas or even gym membership. They look at as a luxury, right? Even though, in my opinion, gym membership should not be a luxury. I think we all need to take care of ourselves and go work out. But in the eyes of, especially, earlier on, not nowadays, it's a little bit more relaxed. But when I first started doing this, any little extra expense, even if you're eating out. So, if they see that you're dining out, because they do review your spending to see, like, where is your money really going and could you afford the minimum payment.
So with hearing this, first of all, I'm surprised, because I think there is this notion that discharging your student loans in bankruptcy is a non-starter. You can't. It's like it's the government and they won't allow you. I mean, these are all the things that I've always heard. Before we move on to bankruptcy, to my next question, I don't know a lot about bankruptcy. I know there's chapter 13 and chapter 7. Do you have to file in a particular way? Can you file 13 or 7? I mean, do you have to fall into a category?
Right. So it depends on your income and your goals, right? So when we're talking about student loans, most of my clients are chapter 7 debtors, right? So chapter 7 is where you don't have to propose a repayment plan. The goal is to just discharge all of the debt outright. And chapter 7s are very straightforward. They're quick. It's just a matter of, are you eligible? Is your income for your household size below the median in your state, right? Because it varies by state. So in a chapter 7, a bankruptcy, so you file it usually within 90 to 120 days, like 3 to 4 months, you get what's called a general discharge. But when you're dealing with student loans, you do have to take an extra step of filing what's called an adversary proceeding, right? So that's basically a lawsuit within the bankruptcy, right? So the borrower would be the plaintiff, and then whoever the lender is would be the defendant, right? So when we're talking about federal student loans, it's going to be the United States Department of Education. So it'd be Natalie Jean-Baptiste versus the United States Department of Education. And then if you have private loans as well, you name anyone who has your loans, right? So if you have Discover student loans, so you're going to add them to the list of defendants, right? So, once you do your bankruptcy, like all of your credit card debt will automatically be discharged because that's what it involves. Right. But because student loans, you have to prove undue hardship, then you have to do the adversary proceeding. Now, let me talk about chapter 13. Chapter 13 is for people with, a lot of assets and regular income. And if their income is above average for their state and household size, right? So they would have to opt for a chapter 13. And that's where you have to propose a payment plan based on what they call your disposable income. So when you look at your monthly budget, if you have, let's say $300 of disposable income left, that's the payment plan you need to propose to the court. So then the payment term will be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, right? So after you've completed your payment plan, whatever debts remain would automatically be discharged. But again, with student loans, it's not automatic. You still have to bring the lawsuit against the holders of your student loans.
This is really shocking to me, because I'm like, we're in a student loan crisis. That's what you hear. Trillions of dollars in student loans that that affect a lot of people, but really affect Black people, Black women. And I'm just shocked that more people don't know that this is possible, or that it seems impossible. Do you think that's intentional? I
think it is intentional, honestly, because when I first started doing this, I thought the revolution was right on the horizon, right? I filed my case in 2013. That was over 10 years ago, right? And I was like, well, everybody's going to find out about this and everybody's going to try to discharge their student loan. So here's why I think that it hasn't really taken off the way it should. Is the problem with discharging student loan debt is that most people, if you're hiring an attorney, they're going to tell you, it's not possible, right? Because they don't even really know how to do it. Most bankruptcy attorneys just won't even tackle it. But the ones that do, the amount of money that they're going to charge you in order to do this, most people who are, qualified for what's the undue hardship cannot afford $10,000 upfront. Like
Oh my
usually,
gosh.
you're thinking about a $10,000 retainer. So if you're struggling with your student loans, chances are you don't have $10,000 that you can just hand over to an attorney.
Of course.
So then nothing happens, right? Because you can't afford it. And not everyone has the wherewithal to figure it out on their own. There are a lot that do. You see a lot of pro se filings in this area, like where people are just filing cases on their own. Similar to me. I mean, I have a legal background, but I try to tell people and empower people that if you went to college, if you have a college degree, this is not rocket science, and this is something you can learn and figure out, right? So this is why I'm really passionate about launching my course to really educate people and empower them. Like, here, this is the step by step. This is not that hard, right? So the problem is, like, people are nervous, they're scared, they don't know. And then when the lawyer tells them, oh, well, I could take a stab at discharging your student loans, but it'll cost you 10 grand. And then that just discourages people. And then the conversation doesn't move forward.
Yeah.
And then just not enough publicity about it. Just,
and so if you are considering, I mean, I think I have so many questions in my head. I'm like, because this is amazing to me. But if you are thinking that can you go to bankruptcy if the only thing that is causing your hardship are the student loan payments? If that's your only debt.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
Okay.
As long as you're eligible for bankruptcy relief, right? So, you have here's one thing and one misconception I want to dispel about bankruptcy, right? Because people, they hear the word and they have an idea what it is, but most people think that when you're bankrupt, you literally have nothing. Right?
Correct.
Like everything gets taken away from you. And that's absolutely false, right? Think about it. Bankruptcy is designed to give you a fresh start. So how could you get a fresh start if you have no money, no house, no car, no furniture, right? So there's something called exemption laws, right? So it's designed to help you protect some of your assets and still get rid of your debt. So for example, in New York City, where I practice, the homestead exemption is about $180,000. So of equity, you can have $180,000 of equity in your home and still discharge all of your debt. And if it's a married couple, it would be double that, right?
Okay.
There's a motor vehicle exemption, right? And it doesn't matter what the value of the car is whatever the equity in your motor vehicle is. There's cash exemption. In New York, there's an unlimited retirement account exemption, right? So you could have $500,000 in your retirement account and still file bankruptcy, right? And the sad part is a lot of people, when they're struggling, they pull money out of their retirement to pay bills and survive. And when that money would have been protected, right? So one of the things that people need to understand about bankruptcy is that you're not losing everything. This is a tool for you to get rid of debt and still hold on to things that matter, right? And then certain places like Florida and Texas have an unlimited homestead exemption. So you can have $1 million house and still get rid of all your credit card debt.
Okay. As you're talking, I'm like, duh, the bells are going off, the aha moments, because this is something that rich people do all the time.
All the time.
That's
with no hesitation.
With no hesitation. And I think the way, I'll just speak for myself. The way I've thought about bankruptcy is exactly how you described it, that you have nothing. I am struggling. I'm about to lose everything. And this is the way, right? This is the way for me to get this weight from off of me. But it is going to take my credit. Am I going to be able to get am I going to be able to live life? But what I like about the way you described it is it is a way to start over, a way to give you a fresh start. And I think that is the mindset shift that has to happen when you're thinking about bankruptcy. especially when you haven't had money and bankruptcy is like a scarlet letter or a stain or an embarrassment. When you mentioned Florida and Texas, I was like, oh, I know it's for wealthy people now, because that's where wealthy people go to protect their money.
Exactly. Exactly. And honestly, like, I haven't been through it myself, right? And the only regret I have is that I didn't do it sooner. I was in the struggle for so long, and I had all these hangups about, what I'm like, I'm an attorney. I'm licensed to practice law. I work with rock stars. Like, how am I in this situation? And I felt like, okay, I'm going to figure this out, and like struggling. And then when I finally decided to do it, and then when I got through it, even before my student loan debt was gone, like when all my other bills were, my credit cards and things were gone, I felt like such a weight lifted, right? And then pretty much as soon as you get that discharge order and the judge signs off on it, I promise you, and I always tell my clients, your mailbox will be flooded with credit card offers.
Oh my God.
Because you're brand new again, right? You have no debt. So you are a better credit risk, right? It's like you're 18 again, and they're like, come get some free pizza and sign up for this credit card. I don't know if anybody went to school in the 90s and early 2000s, you know what I'm talking about.
I got a t-shirt. I sure did.
Right. So when you are debt free, you are better credit risk rather than carrying around 6 figures of debt, because nobody's going to give you a credit card when you owe everybody else. When they know you just came out of bankruptcy and you owe no one else,
they like, come see me first.
Yes, and they know by law you cannot file bankruptcy again for another 8 years. So they know they can have you on the hook for at least 8 years. So that's why, and it's not just, every single one of my clients will say, oh yeah, I just got a credit card offer. And I always advise people, like, use your credit responsibly to rebuild your credit. And even if a client does nothing, usually when they're at the point to file bankruptcy, the only place to go is up. So after the discharge, they'll see a boost in their score, 100 points, even before they start working on rebuilding their credit. Because when a person is at the point where they're ready to file bankruptcy, or bankruptcy is a good option, their credit is already pretty bad, right? It's not great. Right. The only place to go is up.
It's up. And there is time to recover. And look, Natalie, I think you're going to free a lot of people, because by the time you get to, what I consider the demographic of this podcast, which is 40 and up, if you're in your 30s, fine, great, you too. Right. But you've had your student loans for so long that it is a pet. It is a thing that you just feel like you're always going to pay. I've heard people say they're never paying off their student loans. They never plan to. It's too much. I'm going to die with them. So I want to talk about both sides of that. So one, bankruptcy may be a way for you to get this burden off of you if you feel burdened by it. But I also want to talk about the dangers of having that type of mindset where you're just like, I don't care. I'm just going to die with them. What is the problem with that thinking?
I think it is problematic that people have resigned themselves to being, burdened with this debt, like just kind of accepting like this is part of life, to be burdened with this, right? But that's not how life is supposed to be. We're supposed to be abundant. We're supposed to be free, right? So the fact that you think, okay, I'm going to carry this 6 figures of debt for the rest of my whole life, or even if it's only 20,000 or 10,000, it's sad that that's the mindset, right? But I've seen the broad range of people, right? Like I have clients who are depressed and suicidal over the amount of debt that they have. Yeah. But then I have other clients who are just like YOLO, they're going to live and they're not going to worry about it. And and everything in between, right? You don't want to be either extreme, right? Because it's debt, and you don't want to like be taking anxiety medication over your debt, right? But then you also don't want to be reckless and irresponsible. thinking like whatever, because they're never going to get me and I'm just going to live my life. So the thing is, bankruptcy is a powerful tool to help you get that clean slate and that fresh start, especially for people, in their 40s who've been paying since they finished school in their like almost 20 years of carrying this debt that a lot of people have only seen grow in over the years rather than go down.
Correct. Yes.
Mm-hmm. So it just doesn't make sense to be indebted for your education for the rest of your life.
Right.
Like,
and there is something
people who go and, lose everything gambling, they can file for bankruptcy and get a fresh start. Corporations who poison drinking water can file bankruptcy and start over and start a whole new company. So the fact that people who went into debt because they wanted to be better, right? They thought, and they sell you this dream of get a college education. And, especially I'm first generation American. My parents immigrated from Haiti. And, education is huge. Like, you have to go to school, you have to get your degree, go to the best school. And, especially
at whatever cost, right?
Whatever it takes. Yeah. But in so a lot of other countries, education is free or very low cost. Like, they don't understand the impact of student loan debt, and they encourage their kids to take on this debt, thinking, and then now people know better. But I'm talking about when I came up in the when we were applying for student loans in the 90s and early 2000s, like, we just weren't that savvy about what this really means, and they don't really explain it to you until you're leaving in the exit.
And not even then, it's not even an explanation. Then it's just,
they're like, oh, by the way,
your bill is
this much, but you're going to end up paying this much. Good luck. Like, with no real education or tools to provide you with how you're really going to pay it off.
And it's unfortunate because the student loan crisis, what it has done is it's the student loan crisis and the cost of education really has done a disservice to getting an education altogether, because it has lumped the cost of it and the student loan debt with the education, which is still valuable, right? The experience of going to college is more valuable. But when you shackle all of these things to it, it becomes less so, and people are less inclined to do it because they feel like it's not worth it, right? It's not worth it. And look, I feel like, college. Yeah. Some people need college. Like, we need, like, I feel like it's a part of the dumbing down of America, right? It's a whole thing. I can go on a whole tangent about how I think this country is set up. Number one, it's a capitalist society. So it's always going to put its interest above everybody else's, including its taxpayers. And also there's this thing that the dumber you are, the less questions you ask, the less you vote, the less there are all of these things that tie into people not getting the education. And not saying it always has to come from college, but it's a shame that college has gotten such a bad rep. So I want to go into, so what happens if you, what are the, I don't want to say punishment, but what are some of the things that can happen when the government decides that, you need to pay your loans and you're not paying them and you don't go into bankruptcy? What could they potentially do to you for not paying your loans?
Right. Okay. So defaulting on a federal student loan has serious consequences, right? So first off, important to note that federal student loans have no statute of limitations. So a statute of limitations is what the law puts in place to give a time limit for whatever it is. If it's a personal injury case in New York, for example, if you get into a car accident, you have 3 years to sue that person for your injuries. If you wait more than 3 years, then your claim is what they call time barred, right? So for debt collection, same. In New York, you have 3 years. If you owe American Express and they don't sue you and collect within that 3-year mark, then they cannot bring that lawsuit against you. But for federal student loans, there is no time limit and you will owe on that for the rest of your life, right? So there's no statute of limitations. And then they have very powerful collection powers, right? So they can garnish your wages without a court order, meaning they don't have to sue you and win in judgment. They can just send you a letter of intent to garnish, and they notify your employer, and they'll garnish your up to 15% of your paycheck. They can offset your tax refund. So if you're owed a tax refund and you've defaulted on a student loan, they can take your tax refund money. Social Security benefits, other types of social security disability. So they can tap into all of that in order to collect on a defaulted federal student loan.
That's crazy. They hooked themselves up. They're like,
yeah,
no, we're gonna get our money. It is the government. So it really behooves people to really do something about their loans and not ignore it, right? Not put your head in the sand and act like it doesn't exist. So we're in a very kind of weird position right now, post-COVID, because most people haven't been paying their student loan, didn't have to pay their student loans for 3 years. 3 years, they didn't have to worry about it. In most cases, I believe it wasn't incurring interest. And so I think that it started in October or something, that people had to start paying their loans again. And so at the same time, right, there's a lot going on. There is Biden trying to forgive $20,000 of student loans. Then that went to the Supreme Court and it was rejected. And so we're not getting the $20,000 loans. And now they're trying to find other ways to either forgive or discharge or make paying loans easier. So can we just talk about, like, to me, it's all confusing because I'm like, well, what do? You have student loans. What is the first thing that you should be doing to figure out if you can get them forgiven or if you could start paying?
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, a lot of people, they've been in this fantasy land, like you said, it's been 3.5 years, right? So interest started accruing again in September, and then payments were, to resume in October. But one thing I will let people know to put their minds at ease is that there is a grace period or forbearance period, right? It's called it's a 12-month on-ramp to repayment. So between now and September 30th of 2024, you will not get penalized for any late payments, missed payments, anything like that. It will not be reported to the credit bureaus. You will not be, in delinquency or default, because they understand that people have not been paying for all this time and they need time. Everyone needs time to sort themselves out. The servicers are overwhelmed. The wait times to talk to your loan servicer can be up to like 3 or 4 hours. Like it's really crazy right now. So there is a sort of this forbearance time built in that, I think people should know about so that they don't get too stressed out over it.
Okay. What is it called again?
The on-ramp to repayment.
Okay. And it's 12 months.
Yes.
Okay.
So it will end at the end of September of next year.
Okay.
Right. So that's one. And then number two is for people to, get their head out of the sand and really face reality that student loans are due again. So you have to figure out, who your lender is, who your servicer, because a lot of the servicers are no longer in business, right? So they've transferred, the loans got transferred to another servicer, right? So you need to know, is your contact information up to date? A lot of people have not even, people who graduated during the pandemic, they've never even had to make a student loan payment. So they don't know what it's like. They don't even know, the whole experience of that. So they have to, figure out what's going on. So this is what I encourage people, you have to face it, right?
Yeah.
So you know what's going on, know who your lender is, know who you're paying, what is your monthly payment, and then just to figure out what you need to do.
When you say servicer, what does that mean? what do you mean? Is that like that's a Navient, a Sally Mae? I don't know any other
Yeah,
ones.
so
I
it
just
would
know
be,
Navient.
well, Navient is no longer servicing federal student loans. They do have private loans though.
Okay.
So, like it would be like right now, the biggest ones are Mohila, Nelnet,
Okay.
Aid Vantage, like they took over all the accounts for Navient. But
Okay.
the servicer, they work for the federal government
Okay.
to collect the payments and manage the payments. Like they're servicing the loan, even
Yeah.
though
And
the loans are owned by the government.
it would have behooved people to take note of those names and look up those names just in case you get something from those companies in the mail and you have no idea what they are. I mean, I've never heard of those at all.
Right.
Okay.
So one thing I will advise people also is to get familiar with a website called studentaid.gov.
Okay.
Right. So student aid, no matter who your servicer is or how many times it changes hands, if you have a federal student loan, your account information will be in that database. So studentaid.gov. If you don't have a login, you need to create one. So when you create one, you would put in your identifying information like your date of birth, social, your name, your address. You create the loan. When you log into studentaid.gov, you'll see your whole loan history, like your balances, your interest rates, who your servicer is, what repayment plan you're on, like everything is on there. So I invite people, if you are not familiar with studentaid.gov, to get familiar with it, because if you have a question about your federal student loan, I'd say 9 times out of 10, you can get it answered on studentaid.gov.
Okay. So go there, set up an account, figure out where you are. And that's when you will see the types of, so when you say federal loans, I mean, I know if if you've had your loans for a while, you probably already know, but let's just pretend. So what are they called? They're subsidized loans. They are unsubsidized loans.
Right.
Like, can you explain the difference?
Right. So they can be subsidized or unsubsidized, but those are not the main categories. So
okay, what are they?
we're talking about federal student loans. We're talking about 3 different types of loans, right?
Okay.
So we have what's called a direct loan.
Oh.
So a direct loan is literally directly from the United States Department of Education, right? And then people in our age bracket, who went to school in the 90s, early 2000s, they have what's called the FFELP loan. So that's the Federal Family Education Loan Program.
Okay.
So those are funded by private banks, but guaranteed by the federal government. So it's almost like a hybrid, right?
Okay.
So those are the most problematic ones in my opinion, because if you had FFELP loans, you didn't get the benefit of the 0 interest or the payment pause during the pandemic.
I must have had that because I did not during the pandemic. I still had to pay my loans.
Right. So you have those, right?
Right.
And a lot of people in our age bracket have those, and they don't understand that you can apply for a direct consolidation loan and make it a direct loan so you can benefit from the 0. Well, it's too late now, but the 0 interest for 3 years, that's a lot of interest.
Yeah.
For a lot of people who, if you didn't know that you could consolidate it into a direct loan, then you weren't able to take advantage of that. Right.
Right.
So yeah, that's the second type. And then the third type is Perkins loans. And those are directly from whatever school you attended, but it's guaranteed by the federal government as well. But the school is the lender. And Perkins loans are usually for people with like, higher need, like, lower income borrowers.
Those all sound familiar. So let me ask you a question because it's been a while. So I went to grad school and then I in addition to having my undergraduate loans. So I had graduate school loans, undergrad loans. And when I graduated from grad school, one of the things that we did at the time, and I know a lot of my classmates did, I believe my husband did, is that we consolidated our loans at I think my interest rate was through 3%, or it was very cheap even back then. And so if you have done that, somehow I consolidated and they were still federal loans. Is that the second type of loan that you were talking about?
Right. So, okay. I want to make the distinction between consolidation and refinance, right?
Okay.
So when you're using the word consolidation, we're talking about if you already have a bunch of federal loans and you're consolidating them into one new loan with the federal government. So it's still a federal loan, and usually they just take the weighted average of whatever interest rates were. Like if you had 4 different loan accounts with 4 different interest rates, you just have one new loan with the government, and it's just the weighted average of those interest rates.
Okay.
Right.
I guess that's what I did. I have no idea, but it
right.
took my
grant. You got to find, and when you log into studentaid.gov, you'll see, well, it sounds to me like you have the FFELP loan, right?
I did. I paid off my student loans at the beginning.
Oh, lucky you. Yes.
At the beginning of COVID, but still,
right.
my husband still has his. Thank
you. So, so the FFELP loans, if you consolidate, people apply for a direct consolidation loan. Now, that loan is gone and you have a new loan directly with the federal government at zero, well, during the pandemic, 0 interest and no payments due. But again, we're back with that. So that's consolidation. But then some people get tempted to refinance their student loans, right? So they get these attractive offers from these private banks who want you to refinance with them. But that's a big mistake. A lot of people, clients that I had or friends I know who refinanced their loan before the pandemic, and they lost out on all those benefits. Because when you refinance with a private company, you are now turning a government loan into a private loan. So you lose income-driven repayment. You lose any type of forgiveness options, anything like that, and it may save you a couple $100, a couple $1,000 over the years, but it's not worth it, right?
Not worth it.
Think about all the people who lost out on 3 years of 0 interest, right? Just to get, because they were tempted by a lower
short term. Yeah.
My
mind is blown. I'm so shocked by how long I've had these loans and also how little I know about them. How little, look, all I know is Navient at the time was my servicer at the time, and I would just pay them. What kind of loan I had, how to decipher what it all meant. I thought I consolidated. I don't even know how. I thought I was private, and then somehow Navient I have no idea. And that's so crazy to me that the process is it's so confusing. And so I guess where we are now, the government is trying to make up for all of that confusion by making it more simple, which is the government. So I'm still skeptical.
I definitely want to touch on a couple things, right? So now that, you mentioned that the government is trying to make right on all the wrongs that have occurred, right? So there's something called the one-time account adjustment.
Okay.
And, people who have been paying their loans for 20 or 30 years, the government is automatically going back and looking over your payment history over the last, let's say, 20 years, right? And giving people credit for the time that they were in forbearance, for example, because what the servicers were doing, just wrong. They were so wrong for this was something called forbearance steering, right? So when someone would call and say, look, I'm having trouble making my payment, I can't afford this, what can I do? Rather than educating them about the income-driven repayment option, they would just give them a forbearance, right? So during a forbearance, the interest is still continuing to accrue and the balance is growing, right? Rather than they could have, if they're not working, they could have been on a $0 payment plan and been getting credit towards loan forgiveness.
Wow.
And because this was such a practice among a lot of the servicers, now they're going back to do the one-time account adjustment and giving people credit for the time that they spent in forbearance or deferment, and for a lot of people, and they'll give you up to 3 years. But just, they're reviewing accounts, and a lot of people are getting automatic, like they'll get a letter in the mail that says your loans are forgiven,
Yes.
and you have a zero balance. And a lot of people are like, they can't even believe it.
Yeah. I have friends like that. I have two of my really good friends have had their loan. And I'm like,
yes,
you're an enjinier and you're a paralegal. That don't sound like,
right. No, it's because they've been the OGs like us who've been paying on your student loans since the 90s or early 2000s.
Right.
You're getting credit for that. And it's like you feel like you won the lotto, right? Because you've been carrying around this debt for all this time, but they're really reviewing the accounts and giving people credit for that.
Well, I hope that happens for my husband. How long are they going to be reviewing this? How long?
I mean, they're going to be doing it until it's done. But the one thing I will advise people is that if they have those FFEL loans, that they should consolidate to a direct loan to take advantage of this, right?
Okay.
And then when you do consolidate, you're going to get credit for all your pre-consolidation, payments and things. So the deadline for that is December 31st.
This year.
Of this year, yeah.
Oh my God.
To take advantage of that one-time account adjustment.
So do you have to go to what is the website?
Studentaid.gov.
Studentaid.gov.
Yes.
And apply to have your loans consolidated from FFLE to
FFELP.
What you just said
to direct. Yes.
Okay. I feel like I should
the one-time account adjustment, that's what it's called. If you, and then a lot of people, they don't give out those loans anymore. Those don't even exist. They're just, they did away with them, but a lot of people still
have them.
Right.
Okay. People, and is this on their statements? Like, I guess if you go to studentaid.gov, it'll tell you what kind of loan you have.
Right, exactly. Okay. And even on your statement, it should say loan type. So again, this is perfect for the 40 and above crowd.
My husband just turned 50. Like, we going to studentaid.gov tonight.
Right.
That's exactly
what we're doing. So, and now's the time, because December 31st is going to be here before you know
it. Okay.
Yeah.
So what about
the people?
other forgiveness programs? What about if I am a doctor, I work for a nonprofit, or I am a teacher? Is it easier to get that?
Yeah. The public service loan forgiveness program. And it does not matter what your occupation is. That, I think I wanted to dispel that myth. Okay. It matters who your employer is. So if you work for the government or a 501c3 nonprofit, because there are several other types of nonprofit organizations, but it has to be.
I work for a 501c3.
Yeah. So if you work for a 501c3, then if you make payments for 10 years, even if your payments are zero, for example, like if you qualify for a $0 payment, if you have 120 qualifying payments while working full-time for a nonprofit or government employer, then you get your loans forgiven after 120 qualifying payments.
I'm kind of upset.
Sometimes that's 10 years, right? Yeah. And sometimes people take breaks, right? Like they might work for a nonprofit and then go into the private sector and then come back. But as long as you have 120 payments, and the period during COVID counts, right? So that 3.5 years, that's just a bonus. That's like 40 qualifying payments that you didn't have to make, right? So a lot of people are a lot closer to loan forgiveness than.
So I feel like it's super confusing, because I thought you had to be a martyr. I thought you had to be a teacher teaching I thought you had to be a doctor in the hospitals that are the most underserved communities. I thought you had to be Mother Teresa in order to get your loans forgiven. Now I felt like, I paid off my loans. Now I'm like, I could have gotten my loans forgiven.
Even teachers, principals who work for private schools, if it's a 501c3, even if it's a private school, it might not be a public school, but you could still qualify for public service loan forgiveness. And people think you have to be a teacher or something, but you could be the lunch lady, you could be the crossing guard, or the janitor, right? If you work for a public school, then, and you work full time, for 10 years, you can get your loans forgiven under the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program.
You know, I think that this is so enlightening to me. And I feel like, first of all, I feel duped. And then second of all, I feel like, you know, we don't have to be in crisis, like, right? We don't have to. I hate it because I just feel like you have shed so much light, and like it's very hopeful. Like you feel hope, like that you can actually get from under this, and you don't have to die with it. Because that's the thing, and I think people
there are so many ways, right? There are so many ways. So even outside of bankruptcy, right? Like if you know, especially if you work in public service loan, public service, then 10 years is doable. But when they're talking about 20 or 25, I still feel like that's excessive, right?
Right.
So, but if none of these programs benefit you, then know that bankruptcy is there as a tool, and you should not be afraid or ashamed to use it. Like it's your legal right. And rich white people do it all the time.
All the time. When you were talking about, I'm like, that's what they do. This tool is for them. Really.
Right.
And we are made to feel shame about it when rich
like,
people use it as a tool.
I tell my clients all the time, like some of the most successful people have filed bankruptcy.
Yeah, for sure.
Look at, Walt Disney, and these are people who filed bankruptcy before they went on to do amazing things. Walt Disney, Henry Ford, George Foreman, like before he started the Foreman Grill empire, he was bankrupt, right? So it's like without that fresh start, they might not have been able to go on and do these great things with that burden of debt, carrying that burden of debt around, So
one thing I want to go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, so yeah, like we talked about public service loan forgiveness. We talked about the on-ramp to repayment. One thing I do want to mention is that, under the Biden administration, they introduced the new income-driven repayment plan called SAVE. So it's short for Saving on a Valuable Education. And that will reduce people's payments to only 5% of their discretionary income, when before the best one available was 10% of your discretionary income. But it gives, and another great benefit of the SAVE plan is that any unpaid interest is subsidized by the government. So you're not going to watch your loan balance grow. As long as you're making your payments on time, all of the interest will be taken care of.
So do you have to ask for these when you go to studentaid.gov or you call a phone number? Do you have to ask for these things by name, or are the people equipped there to help you? Unlike the previous time where they were pushing you into forbearance, are the representatives there to help you, or should you go in there knowing what you want?
Well, it honestly, it depends, right? Because depending on who you get on the phone, they might not know what they're talking about. Now they've been cautioned. They cannot like intentionally, put you in forbearance when they know they need to tell you about, the income-driven repayment option. But like I said, I'm telling everybody, if you go to studentaid.gov and you can't get your question answered, like you must have the most unique, question that's out there in the world, because all the answers you need are there. And one thing that is great on that website is also the loan simulator tool. So basically, if you log in and you use that tool, it'll give you a side-by-side comparison of all the different repayment options, right? And then you'll see, okay, if I choose this plan, this is how long it's going to take me, and this is how much I would have repaid, right? And then also I want to point out that it's not a one size fits all, right? Because everyone has different goals and everyone has different situations, right? Because some people, it makes more sense to pay it off quickly and just get rid of it, right? If you have the means to. But if you know that you can't afford to keep your lights on and make a big payment, then you can benefit from the income driven. So you want to take advantage of that. But the goal is to pay the least amount in the least amount of time, right?
So with the save program, you're paying it based on your income. Do you pay that for life? Do the loans discharge after? Oh,
so if you have a very low balance, it could be gone in as little as 10 years.
Okay.
But for most people who have just undergrad loans, it's going to be 20 years.
Okay.
If you have grad school loans, it'll be 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal is, if you're making those income-driven repayments for that period of time, whatever balance remains, even if it's $500,000, if you've made the number of qualifying payments, then the balance will be forgiven.
Okay.
Right. So if you're on Save or any of the other income-driven repayment plans, the ultimate goal is to get forgiveness, right? If that's your goal. But I mean, honestly, the ultimate goal should be to get it out of your life as soon as possible.
Correct.
If you
I mean, especially our age, because we, like 20 years, that's retirement. You should be thinking about how you're going to take care of yourself when you're not working, a traditional job, or you're pulling back on your work. You shouldn't be thinking about, dang, I got 5 more years on this loan where I'm 70. So I think that plan is great for people who are just graduating now, or maybe they graduated 10 years ago, and you still have, time, right? You still have some time left. But if you are, 40 plus, and 20 to 25 years seems like a long time, especially if you haven't been paying, or I don't know what your situation is. I think that is the case. You should be trying to get rid of it beforehand, because in my unexpert opinion, I feel like, this time now, whatever you're saving for, the priority should be, how am I going to take care of myself in my older years?
Right.
Whether I'm working whether I continue to work in some capacity or not. When you're 70 or 75, how do you plan to take care of yourself? And anything that you're, if you're saving, it needs to be for that, not to pay Uncle Sam or whoever.
Right. And a lot of people in our age group or in older, they have their own loans, and they've also taken out parent loans.
Kids. I forgot about that.
So that's a whole other situation.
What can you get your kids' loans can parents get their loans for their children forgiven?
Yeah. So parent plus loans. Yeah. So they can't, whatever their kids have, that's
on their kids
to deal with. Yeah. But if they have their own loans, I mean, they can qualify for what's called the income contingent repayment, which is not that great. It's 20% of your discretionary income. So, I mean, if you pay on that for 20 years, you can ultimately get the balance forgiven. But I've seen a lot of my bankruptcy clients who have Parent Plus loans, and they cannot afford even the minimum payment on income driven. So again, I mean, we should do a whole other podcast on just bankruptcy alone.
We should
understand, like,
we want to live like the rock stars you were helping. We want to do that. But before we go, I know this has been super helpful. I cannot wait for people to hear this. I do want to ask your opinion about when people are considering loans, either for themselves or for their kids, the difference between federal and private.
Right. Okay. So first, I will say, if you can finance your education without going into debt, please explore all avenues possible, because it's really not worth it. And I feel like the problem is going to get worse before it gets better. So that's A. And then B, so there are, the biggest differences, I'd say, between federal and private. Let me just highlight some. So the federal government, they are just going to give there's no credit check. If you're the student and you want to go to school, and that's part of why they make it so hard to get out of, because it's very easy to get into, right? And you could be 17. You don't even have to be the age of majority, right? You're technically, in the eyes of the law, you're an infant in the eyes of the law. And a lot of people take on student loans when they're infants, right? They're not even 18 yet. So, there's no credit check. You don't have to be of age. You just sign off on it. The interest rates are generally lower for the federal government. Again, there's no statute of limitations, and they can like collect on it without, going through the formalities of suing you or winning a judgment.
Okay.
Private loans, on the other hand, usually they require a cosigner, which causes problems because usually mom or grandma or somebody co-signed. They do, they look at your credit worthiness. The interest rates are typically a lot higher. But one good thing about private loans is that there is a statute of limitations, right? Depending on which state you live in, there's going to be a time limit on how long they can collect on it. And they have to sue you and prove to the court that you actually owe that before they can enforce any judgments, right? Before they can garnish your wages or put a lien on your bank account or things like that. They have to go through all the formal steps. So
is a private loan similar to like if you had a cell phone bill that you need to pay or a credit card bill, you can negotiate,
exactly. You can
pennies on the dollar.
Okay. A settlement, you can play that game of cat and mouse with them. You can dispute the debt, do all the things that you would do if it was a credit card or a cell phone bill or something like that. The only distinction is that it is more difficult to discharge in bankruptcy because you do have to go through those extra steps because it's a student loan. But in all other respects, it's as if you owe just a regular, not unsecured debt, right? Because if you owe American Express, they have to sue you and win before they can enforce, before they can collect on that and enforce it.
It's a lot.
I know it's a lot. I think if you're listening to this podcast, you might have to listen to it again one more time to really get it all.
Get your pen out, take your notes. I'm gonna go upstairs before I forget and pull out my computer. We're going to studentaid.gov as soon as we're done. So thank you so much. I feel like this is gonna help so many people. I hope so too. And I hope that somebody gets some type of relief or they see a light at the end of the tunnel or they see some hope, because I think, student loans can make you feel hopeless unless you just have that attitude. It's just like you said, YOLO. But I even the YOLO people, I think they are probably
it still kind of weighs on them, but they don't let it get them.
They don't let them get
But I know they know about it and they're just they have a different way to cope, which is good. I applaud that. But again, you got to find a healthy balance. Because if you can't get out of bed because you owe student loans, then that's not good either. So and this is why I do this and try to teach people, to give them the hope and the knowledge that they need to take matters into their own hands, right? Whether it's going to be that you're applying for an income-driven repayment plan, or whether it's going to be filing for bankruptcy and getting a fresh start and getting rid of it once and for all, depending on what your situation is, because not everything is for everybody. So this has been tremendously helpful. And I think I will have you on to talk about bankruptcy because, I feel like people, especially, I don't know, but they're saying we're going into a recession and everything is bad, but the economy's still doing good. I just feel like that's going to need to be a tool that somebody needs, right? Because we have been, flying so high for so long. The economy it's been great. Right. And so if the economy is going in a way that they're predicting, then I feel like there's going to be a lot of pain. So we may have to have you back. We want to have you back to talk about bankruptcy, but thank you so much, Natalie. This has been amazing. Been amazing. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And, if anyone has questions, please, feel free to reach out. I guess the best way to find me is on my website. It's slaystudentloandebt.com. Of course. And, any information you need is there. My social, I'm most active on Instagram. So it's also at Slay Student Loan Debt. And I will have all of that information, your bio, how you can reach Natalie, how you can follow her on social media, all in the show notes of this podcast. So thank you, everybody, for listening, and I will see you next time.